Michael and I connected some time ago, and I can't recall exactly which business, Michael, because you've done a number of businesses that I've been either acquiring, disposing of, and or working with. So I know you've done some other ones, but let me talk. If I could talk generally, Michael, about my approach to this, and then we'll kind of skydive into you individually, and then kind of some of the work that you do as well with clients. Does that make sense to you?
Please, yes.
And my apologies for being a little less than composed on this, because Michael and I have not done this before, and this is usually more analytical work, and it's not really presented. I mean, it's used for presentation purposes, but it's usually not presented in the way we're doing. So I think we're feeling our way a little bit with this. But how many, just a quick show of hands, how many of you are familiar with what I call more robust financial modeling, like they use in mergers and acquisitions and things like that? I know you have to be for what you do. Have others done more robust financial modeling? Okay, so we've got one here, Michael, in this group that has done some of this work. I originally got exposed to financial modeling when the company I was with, I was on the senior management team. We were going IPO, and I got, talking to the bankers, and I was involved in the finance side of the business, and start seeing some of the ways they were analyzing the business. I'm like, holy crap! I really wish we would have had this, a long time ago, because got all these bright people looking at your business and really trying to understand the recipe for profit that you have for both the risk and that. And so I think at that point I got the light bulb went on me. This is pretty important stuff. And I think for companies thereafter, usually, and maybe these things get discounted because they're used in fundraising. Okay, show me that hockey stick of revenue and profit that I put in $1 and $50 comes back out, and they get discounted somehow in that. It's like, oh, somebody's just playing around with numbers on an Excel spreadsheet. This is not that. Now, you do some of that work, Michael, in terms of analytic work and things like that for mergers and acquisitions and financings and that. But the way in which, where I'm speaking to from today is as business owners and business leaders, what is our recipe for profit? And if we play with the levers, what happens? And so let me run through a couple of it's a number of bullet points. I view this as a strategic and tactical planning tool. It's our recipe to maximize profit and then the value of our firms over time. And if you do these things right, and I've really been delighted to work with Michael. My experiences with Michael have been excellent. You then can take all of your key metrics and assumptions, and it gives you a profit, cash, valuation picture of the results of your current business recipe, and then allows you to toggle your recipe to either add, remove, reduce, delay components to see the impact not only on year one or next month or average profitability, but what does it mean to the 5-year value of my firm? And I'll give you some examples of things I've done. So here's some insight that I use it for, and I started running out of time on impact because I've used it so many different ways. Impact on year 5 stock value and year 3 cash flow of a 5% increase in qualified leads. Impact of 1% increase in conversion of qualified leads. So if I have X number of qualified leads, if I increase my conversion rate by 1%, this is right down Dana's alley. This is the land he lives in. What if I improve my conversion ratio by 1%? How does that impact cash flow, profits, and then my valuation in 5 years? What if I could decrease my COGS by 2%? What does that happen on year 5? And does that improve if I have a cash shortfall in month 37 using my current recipe for profit and growth? If I can reduce COGS by 2%, have I solved my funding problem? What's the impact on working capital I got to keep in the business by decreasing receivables by X days and increasing payables by Y days. How much more capital can we haul out of the business or use to fund growth? Impact, and this is where Michael is. There's just there's levels of people that do these, and Michael, I don't want to oversell you, but it's pretty fun what you're able to do, and keep it simple. What if you took down $500,000 in debt on the business? What does that look like in your back? Can you absorb it? What about in year 48 or month 48? What does that look like? And with a lot of growth in there. What about if you took down $500,000 in debt and $500,000 in equity? What happens to the value of the firm? And you can just plug that in. And if you're busy, you can have Michael for a fee. Michael can do some of those gymnastics for you. Flushes out, I think, in working with Michael, and then you refine these models over time. It flushes out key metrics that I'd ignored. I didn't realize that lever over there, of whatever it might be, is a big lever. And actually, if I didn't realize it, that, gosh, that comp plan I had for the salespeople, that sucker's a loser in month 36. Looks great in year 1 and month 18, and then year 3, as I ramp those guys up, it's terrible. I see the profit starting to drag down. Why is that? Impact of CapEx, increases in headcount, impact of pricing changes. What happens to the break even of the company? So you can see, that's getting into some of his cash flow issues. And I think, Michael, you can even help us identify, a general ratio for break even for making an expenditure in the company. You can help us identify what a break even is on I'm going to hire someone. What's generally the break even of additional value they'd have to bring in to pay for themselves? And that's
right.
Yep.
Absolutely.
Yep. And identifies if your current strategy will grow you out of cash. So on your current trajectory, we grow. So here's the caveats. It is a blunt instrument. Michael brushes me back from the plate on a regular time and says, "Now remember, this is swagging. This isn't, but as you refine it, it gets pretty darn accurate. So it starts blunt. So keep your expectations, metered somewhat." My suggestion, Michael will have his, you update these at least annually with your current assumptions and take a fresh look at your assumptions, make sure they're relevant. And I think, Michael, the area that's been probably as powerful as others, and this is kind of on topic with one of our members was just presenting on, it's very powerful when the leadership team is exposed to and trained on the financial model, because then they focus on what really drives the financial engine of the business. And they also gain awareness and skill of the cost, benefit, and break even of new hires, new expenditures, and discounts in particular. It's amazing how expensive discounts are. And it keeps me and the CFO from always being the bad guys. The model becomes the bad guy because you got to make it's the model. It's not me. This is the model. So with that, Michael, I'm going to flip back to you. You're up on the left-hand side. Your screen is up on the right. You may need to, if you have the ability with a touch screen or with Excel, to kind of highlight areas and bring them up. We can't quite see it clearly. It's pretty small.
It's pretty small, yeah. So I'm gonna do 100% maybe. Is that better?
It's better.
Better for me. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Better.
Are we recording this, by the way?
Yes.
Awesome. Yes.
So thank you, Tim. Appreciate a good introduction. I think that what I always tell people is financial plans are great, and it's very important for you to be doing, whether you're raising capital or not, or whether it's an M&A process or something else. But the only thing we can be sure of is that the numbers at the end of the day will be different from what we projected. They certainly won't be exactly what we projected. and how much trust does anyone really put in this if you're presenting it to potential investors or acquirers? It's always going to be a certain amount of grain of salt taken with that. But the key really is the process of, I think, developing the financial plan for you and the team. And through that, you may be very knowledgeable, or your team may be very knowledgeable, but in most situations, improving the understanding of the financial mechanisms of the business, and in particular when it comes to then having discussions with potential investors, if that's what's relevant, being able to really portray that knowledge to them is an incredible asset. These folks who may be investors or are looking at these businesses understand that as well. So they see it as a very important driver and attractiveness of a company. They look at that there is a plan that has had a lot of thought and effort put into it, even though they, just as me, are assured that reality will be different. Sometimes a little bit different, and other times significantly different from these plans. And in thinking about what I see as the sort of the key, the cornerstones of putting together a financial plan, more in a detailed sense, I put together a short list of those items, I think the most important one is cash and working capital are essential for the thriving and success of a business. And I sometimes get people coming to me essentially with just a P&L concept, on an annual basis, and that's what they think about as a financial plan, and I have to quickly disabuse them of that, of course. And so the plan really needs to have a full set of P&L, balance sheet, and cash flow statement to make any sense, really. And then secondly, doing it on an annual basis may sometimes as a starting point be helpful to understand it, but for a real financial plan, it's not sufficient. You need really to look at things on a monthly basis to understand seasonalities and intra-year effects of working capital and expansion and other things. And so that's why all my financial models are built on a monthly basis, whether it's 3 years, 5 years, or more, really. You may look at what I'm showing here today and say, "Wow, that's complicated, and it's got a lot of features in this Excel model." And I would say it may seem like that, but it's really not a very complex model in terms of the Excel functions and features. It's just mostly adding and multiplying, and a few tricks here and there just to make it smoother. But you can also use complex Excel features to make things neater, use less space, and so forth. That makes them sometimes look beautiful and neater. But instead, they also make them harder to audit and to find problems, and everyone makes mistakes in Excel. It's just the nature of the beast, and the fancier the setup is, the harder it is to find those mistakes and then see where they are. And also, if, let's say, you lose touch with the guy who built the model for you, to find someone else to make changes to it gets increasingly difficult, and I've come in to some situations like that where we've given a model that was built by someone else in an overly complex way, and had to unravel that really to help the client. And then just sort of continue with that complex forecasts and similar attributes and models are not necessarily always making it better, just because it's a very intricate model for forecasting demand, for instance, doesn't necessarily make it a better forecasting model at the end of the day. And then finally, I think it's really essential, once you have a good model together, to include some kind of scenario analysis in it, where you can play around with different scenarios for, it may be growth, it may be cost of goods sold, other kind of costs, and see what the effects are on the model for your profitability and cash position and other things, and think about how that impacts your business from a financial perspective or operating perspective. And so this model here has a very basic scenario analysis tool, but for in other situations, I can employ things like Monte Carlo simulation analysis, which really takes that concept to another level. You can sort of see impact on the business by running tens of thousands of simulations on the model, and see a distribution output from that. So that's sort of the cornerstones of my philosophy and putting these things together.
Thank you. Would it be possible, Michael, maybe show us, would you mind showing us maybe some, I'm trying to think about where best to start, but maybe with the assumptions tab, if you wouldn't mind, please, and maybe expand that kind of, or where would you like to start,
Michael? I
Michael?
wanted to just back into it by starting at that on this dashboard page, because that's really the end result. And
Okay.
say this is where it all comes together at the end. This is the pretty part of the model where the key numbers come together, and then the charts obviously with the key metrics. So that's the end result in a way, where you can see condensed way what the projections are. So we'll come back to that later on. And
Okay.
yeah, she said let's go to the assumptions page. I'll make this a bit bigger. Is that good?
It's better. Keep going a little.
Keep going a little more, please.
Okay.
And if you could, we can't necessarily see the legend, so if you could distinguish between the green and the yellow, please.
Okay. Right. So, and actually, I have to thank Tim for this. He gave me this idea with the colored cells on the first project we worked on together. So, I owe him some kind of royalty fee, I guess, on that.
We just took a note on that, Michael, just so you know.
Nicholas the going rate.
We're very small. But the sort of the key standard in modeling or informal standard is that for input cells, people like using blue fonts for those. So that's helpful. But it's kind of hard to see anyway. And with these brighter colors that might be a little garish, it gets a lot easier to see. What's an input cell where you can change things and what's not. If people like me get users actually going in and changing numbers that shouldn't be changed and that break models. Making this very clear is an advantage. So the yellow-orange cells with blue font here are input cells that are intended to be changed by the user, and obviously the numbers in here, but they can be changed to anything within reason, really, such as we're looking at here the annual marketing budget for the company, which is set for the first year, but then we can choose here how much it should grow for the second year, whether it's 200% or change it to 175%, and that will flow through the model then entirely. So that's sort of the basic concept here. So this model here is like most of what I do, set up to, or in a case like this where it's consumer-oriented business, to be driven in terms of the demand aspect of the business by advertising spending on internet advertising, essentially, so that we can somewhat try and model the demand for products. In some cases, the demand side or revenue side of the business will be looked at more on a top-down basis, where maybe you have a starting point and then forecast a growth of X% for the next year, and then going further than that. But for businesses where there's a reasonable way of trying to project revenues on a more granular bottoms-up basis, I think it's an advantage to try and do that, at least to compare with the top-down approach. So here...
If I could, Michael, I'm going to interject just for a moment here. So in doing these, just as a fellow CEO here, I would just kind of go top to bottom in your business and just say, at Genesis, what's the first thing that has to happen? Okay, it's conversations. It might be a conversation. You have to define what those are, but think of your sales funnel and defining your sales funnel, but kind of how many conversations, and so that would be that might be one data input, is how many conversations. Okay, so I have 15 conversations with suspects right now. Of those conversations, how many end up being prospects? And then you can toggle that number and say, okay, well, I think for every 100 conversations I have going, I end up with 5 prospects. And then of every 5 prospects, Dana, this is like write down this is what you guys do. Then of that 5 that I got, how many of those will convert into customers, and at what revenue per customer, and so Michael can then build that into your model. You can just make those whatever you want to be that you think are your core revenue drivers, and then in that you can say, okay, that's what we're doing with our salespeople. Then here's our comp system for those salespeople. As those sales come in, here's our base cost. Our sales make this much. Our salespeople make this much base. How much bonus do they make, and do they have an accelerator in their bonus? And how does that flow out if we model this out? How does that look at different inflection points? So I think, Michael, you've got this one more kind of a CPM type of, and you've got a click-through rate here and a cost per click.
Right.
That's going down to ultimately a conversion ratio and then a cost down here per conversion. So it's doing a very similar thing. It's just doing it with internet leads. But that way then you can play around with your efficiencies and figure out, what are we doing now? What if we could improve it by X? And would you say generally this top line stuff, these metrics up here tend to be fairly sensitive to the model as you start playing around with conversion ratio, particularly conversion ratio? Does that tend to have some sensitivity around it?
Yeah, of course. It can have a big impact on the model overall in terms of numbers. And it has to be anchored in reality, of course. So that's the tricky part when you don't have a lot of experience. The company is relatively new. Of course, what's a reasonable conversion rate to have? Absolutely. But again, this is an iterative process where you need to try and have your best guess at what these numbers should be, and then improve them over time, and comparing with other similar companies as well as potential investors, if that's the case. But as you said, also for another type of business, that can be a funnel where it's really based on sales calls, outreach sales, and the qualified opportunities leading to sales eventually in that kind of process. So it's a similar thinking in terms of bottoms up here. So in this model, thinking is we divide up the marketing budget into buckets that are reasonable in terms of the ability to spend, and then the conversion rates, and that's going to then drive conversion and lead opportunities for this business then, with in the end, the number of people that come to the website and are converted into customers for that business.
So I see you've got line 92, row 92 is coming up. You've got an estimate in there for churn rate. So how many customers are rolling off? If you're on that's probably, we have a couple members that are on recurring revenue models and that, and so that's a critical number.
Right. This is a fairly high number, but it sort of reflects the case that this was grabbed for. So
yep.
It obviously may vary quite a lot between different types of businesses.
Average checkout dollars, that's the amount per spend when they're there. That's the revenue per customer, per transaction.
Sure.
That's 93. B93.
And we have average purchase per month, and we get some business from internet affiliates, so they get a cut of the revenues. We get some return product, so that has to be taken out of revenues, and then we have some costs for inventory here.
And I would say, if I could pause for just a moment, if for those of you that are kind of looking at it and going, holy crap, this looks like really complex, and I don't know that I want to go this deep into the pool and stuff like that. Usually, just so you know, when I'm working with someone like Michael on this stuff, I usually just come up with I think, Michael, typically I'm sending you off maybe 40 rows on an Excel spreadsheet where I've just written in, these are the things I want inputs for, and here's some rough numbers to start with. And that's all I give you is maybe 30, 40 cells of stuff and some cost assumptions.
Give examples of what those 30 to 40 cells are.
Pardon?
Give examples of what the 30 to 40 cells would be.
So I would say, and Michael, cross-check me on this because you've seen a billion more models than I have, but I would say, so I'm usually starting out with, usually with this, because he'll build a month zero balance sheet, or if you want to start off with your ending balance sheet from your business, because all of ours are going concerns. So he'll build in where you left off to then project forward from where you are. But assuming he's got the financial linkage, and he can do that, he's done that, he can make that linkage, then I'm doing the revenue, what's the revenue drivers, the key revenue drivers. And I don't need to, I can kind of make some wags about what the numbers are, but a lot of times I just want placeholders so I can play with it, and then as I get information, then I can populate that and narrow it down. But all the revenue drivers, all the big COGS stuff, so I'll say I need a placeholder for a CFO in this particular business, but I don't know when I'm going to hire him. So Michael will create a row for a CFO, and then he'll have in year one, when do you hire him? Year two, when do you hire him? And I'm like, I'm not going to hire this person until year two. So then the cost doesn't hit till then. So you can plan kind of what your future org chart looks like in this. So I'll say, make a placeholder for a CFO. Here's a profitability of a customer. Here's my costs that go with a customer. Here's my acquisition cost to get a new customer. Here's the retention rate of my customer. So make a thing for retention rate. Michael figures out how the math flows through on his end. So he solves all that. He'll clarify with you, but he solves all that stuff.
Yeah, well, it tends to be a little bit of an iterative process, obviously, first to understand what is the business model and what are the revenue drivers, as you said, and how does it break down, and then the variable costs associated with the product or the service to deliver it, and isolating those to see what really goes up and down with revenues. And so that becomes a bit of a back and forth a couple of times. And then on the overhead expense side with staffing and sort of those types of expenses, they tend to be, at least in terms of categories, they're relatively similar for most businesses. And so they're, my models, I have all those things from the get-go, essentially. So the challenge there becomes narrowing down to what's reasonable in terms of amounts, and sometimes that takes a little bit more of thinking, because it's sort of absolute dollar amounts and what's reasonable to spend on legal fees, for example, or PR, which will vary.
If you have different business units or business product lines of that, you could do the profitability or the model at the product level and then roll it up from there, or at the service level, or maybe for stuff I work on, and for you, Dana, maybe it's at the customer, this customer or at this product service level. Is this? We're getting kind of geeky here, so I want to make sure I'm making the connection here. But basically, you end up with maybe it's typically 1 pages of inputs, other than the capital stuff. Michael, is that about right? It's usually 1 page of inputs that back and forth that you end up with.
Well, it depends on how you define it. 1 page, but yeah, it's not a lot more.
Yeah.
But it's what we're looking at here.
It's 1 page.
Right. That's the one.
So,
But the short answer is our businesses are unfortunately this complex.
Yeah.
And you got to get into the devil's in the details, and you look at the levers. The beauty is once you get this, for instance, in this one, So here, right now, as we're tracking here, we can see down to about row 130. You've got variable cost assumptions starting on 117. Here's what my variable
Right.
cost for this, and maybe walk us through like one of these cogs here.
Right, right. So these are sort of, invented numbers, obviously, here. But the point I wanted to make here is the way this is set up with COGS here is that we've got a base case, which is this line here. That is the starting point for the model. That's what we, reasonably think it will be. But then we've built in here an optimistic scenario with the lower COGS and a conservative scenario. I don't want to say worst case, but conservative scenario with a higher COGS under certain circumstances. And then as we can go back later and see, then we can run scenarios showing the impact of changing that on the rest of the model and flip between those three scenarios. And that can be done for most other things in this model, if it makes sense to have, say, three, or it could be more scenarios to flip between and linked sets of assumptions, essentially. And that I think it can be very revealing to for the planning purposes, really. So we can do that. So then I think we can just quickly look at some of these things in overhead expenses. You mentioned staffing for Tim. So what we have here is the expected staffing for the business over 5 years with the different roles mapped out here and the compensation. And the compensation is for one person here in this model. Obviously, you're just going to have one CEO, but you may have multiple customer service reps. And so therefore, it's broken out with one part for comp and another section for the actual staffing. And so here, we're going to start with 2 customer reps, and then we're going to go to 8 and 20 and so forth as the business grows. And in this particular model here, it's a manual input, but in other situations, we'll build it so that the number of customer service reps is linked directly to revenues of the business or some other metric that grows with the company, and therefore it'll adjust directly based on the growth pattern that you're projecting.
So I think if you said I want a Stanford or Harvard or MIT grad to come and do sophisticated financial analysis on my business, it's going to look like this. And if you say, where does it hurt? Give me recommendations of where can it go. So you've got top line, cost of goods sold, general and administrative stuff that we've touched on so far. And there's a bunch of different ways to run them, but it's trying to understand your model, the way your business really runs, and what's your recipe for. Michael can put in cost escalator saying we're going to have an average 3% a year price increase. And I want to be able to play with that number, whether it's 1% or 3%. What impact does that have on the value? Michael, if we could cut maybe to the chase for just a minute, maybe go back to the stock value. Would you mind flipping to that tab back on the one where you've got the table so they can just see the output of this, of all this. So here you got office space, and then Michael, you did a
quickly, because one of the things here with staffing is it's hard to plan with what kind of real estate you need. And what I say to people is figure out a variable cost per person that makes sense in the area you're in, and say, okay, we know we're going to spend $6,000 for the first year, and then, that's going to have room for 20 people. But beyond that, we'll figure it's $500 per person, and then you can just let that flow through the model essentially. Okay, but so you want to go directly to the sort of the value part of the.
If you would please, just for a moment, let me have a look at that for
Okay.
these guys. Michael,
That's very small here, but
yeah, if you could bring that up quite a bit. So let me walk through here on this end. So you've got your seed round. Let's assume you had some outside investment. This could just be you and your business. So this is saying if you're holding for 5 years or in the next 5 years, let's say you had a hired gun in there and they're responsible for raising the value of your company. You're not exiting, but they just are there to. So here, this assumes outside money. Let's say they put in $5 million. Pre-money valuation was $15 million. So they've got what, 33% or so of the company.
25%.
25, thank you. 25.
Because post-money is
20.
pre-money plus
Or,
the
yeah,
investment.
25. So there we go. 25. Doing this on the fly here. So Series A, so seed round, then these different financings here as to what percentage. So you can play with these numbers. Do they get anything? Are you going to do any Series A money? And then here's the seed equity diluted ownership, Series A diluted ownership, which is a reflection of the additional financings, right? It continues to dilute the pie for them as they bring in additional money. Then you guess what is it the
And of course, the higher the valuation is on the later rounds, the less dilution there is. So that's basic finance.
And then your exit EBIT multiple. So this is typically how you're going to see your businesses valued. Generally, sometimes it's a multiple of revenues, but usually it's a multiple of EBIT or EBITDA. He's got in here as a 12x, and you can play around. It's yellow, so you can play around with it. And then you can see the exit enterprise value. Now you have some debt on here, correct? You have debt outstanding is that right?
No, there's no debt here. There's no debt.
Oh, there it is. I'm sorry.
We're adding back the cash.
Cash on the balance sheet. And then it shows what those investors would have gotten on their money on an internal rate of return on the A, the seed, and then the A. There was no B round in this.
Right.
Is that based on can you change that based on the year that you're exiting? Because in that case, the 141 comes from what year?
Yeah, so this is set up for the 50 year, so it's exiting.
Oh, got it. Okay. All right.
But you can set the year. You can say I want
it
40
can look
years.
at it for 5 years.
You can do one.
So this is a simplistic model, obviously, to get a shorthand answer to what's the potential exit value for the company. So it's just looking at a 5-year exit, which is what people generally want to see, even though reality is sometimes very different. But that's sort of the typical horizon people choose to look at.
Could you show the monthly cash flow so they could get a sense of that, Michael? Because this is all driven.
Sure.
All of this, other than these last points here, where you can toggle these assumptions. Everything else is driven from the assumptions table that Michael already showed you. Okay,
Right.
Here's your sensitivity.
We have some sensitivities also here to look at what's the impact of higher or lower EBIT in the business relative to the base forecast, and then higher or lower multiple and the impact on the IRR for the seed, I believe it is. Yeah, for the seed investor. But yeah, we can look at the monthly. So I'll first just go quickly. This is very small, but I just want to make a quick point here. So this tab here is sort of the engine of the model because it calculates out line by line, sort of all the relevant metrics in a very granular fashion. So revenues by product or service, and then cost per month per person and all other line items in a very detail-oriented way. And this is coming back to what I said before, that I prefer setup where it's easily audited by me or someone else to see what's really going on, and not a black box. And this it's a lot of lines here, but there's no cost for it. So I think it's a better approach in general for doing this. So, but this results really in this monthly tab where we have a P&L, a balance sheet, and a cash flow statement month by month, showing what the revenues of the business are, and obviously the profitability and the cash flow of the business, and where the cash position is from starting point with assuming the financing here and running off for 5 years. So we can track this on a month-to-month basis, which is the underlying numbers for some of the graphs that you saw at the beginning.
It flips in month 19, it looks like, or no, wait a minute, it's in month 12, so starting at year 2 then.
That's the Series A.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, we can see the EBIT margin here goes from fairly negative to less negative, and then it goes positive here in month 29, and it rises from there. So that's one metric.
So what this is telling me is that your Series A doesn't need to be that big.
Right.
How much money did they need, Michael? Will this solve for that? Because this will tell you what your burn would be with zero financing. You'd end up with you'd end up with your negative cash.
Yeah, well, there's a way to put that in, but you risk overcomplicating a model a little bit by putting in calculations like that, and it's easy to see, obviously, when you put in lower numbers or higher numbers, if and when you run out of cash through the dashboard and the graphs. So that's pretty clear when you don't have enough.
I'm going to pause for 1 minute, please, and Michael, I'm going to check in with our guys. You seen enough? Do you got a good flavor for it? Do you want to hear some more questions?
How would you apply a similar methodology to an ongoing concern where it's either not sales focused, I guess, or not so, maybe not product, or and no investor concern, or no need for raising money. So like my business is
service industry,
Right.
Cash basis. So I have models for figuring out, okay, what are the levers that I should be focusing on? Should I be trying to increase my average bill rate, or my effective bill rate, blended bill rate? Should I be trying to increase billable utilization of my people? Should I try to decrease the cash conversion cycle, things like that? But not so much, levers of, what my qualified leads engine looks like and that sort of thing. Do you have any,
Right.
you understand?
Right.
So is your methodology, I guess, broadly applicable to different industries?
Yes, absolutely. I think in the case like yours, it becomes necessary to look, more in detail of those aspects of the business that drive the numbers and different segments of the revenues or the costs that are generating these revenue or expense numbers. So spending more time on particular aspects of them. And the advantage of having a model like this is you can see the impact, obviously over several years,
Right.
from making smaller changes
Yeah.
to it, as opposed to just, let's say, over a few months or an isolated basis.
Cool.
Any other questions with this group on this, or just the nature of modeling for Michael? And he's again come back and he's underlined my point. It's a blunt instrument,
Yeah.
and if you make it too sharp, you risk too much complexity, and that'll add risk, and you may not get a better answer. Any other questions about this? And
It's impressive.
Michael,
Looks like a great tool.
It's a great idea.
Michael creates these. It depends on the complexity level, but generally for a straight over tackle one, or is about $1,000 for a model to have one done on your business.
Amazing.
And I think the good news is, if you said, how's an investor, how would someone else beat up my business?
Yeah.
And maybe even how's my competitor looking at their business? They're getting down, if they're a sophisticated competitor, and particularly if they have outside money, like I know with Mark isn't here for this particular presentation. I know and a lot of companies I've worked with, we have outside money in. Believe me, they're looking at this stuff. I know you're under this kind of, that's why this is near and dear to your heart. But the good news is it really refines down what's the model. And I think where I loved it with my team, and this is just shared experience, when they said I'd come up with an idea, one of my crazy wild ass entrepreneurial ideas, and they go, well, have you put that through the model yet? Mm-hmm. And I loved it. And they weren't doing it as a defense mechanism or a blocking thing. They said, it's cool. Have you put it?
to know.
They wanted to know, have you put it through the model yet? Yeah. Does that thing hold water? What does it do to the model? Is that worth? It's like a filter. You put it in and you go, well, I did it, but it didn't really, it cost us here. It was kind of a net neutral when I looked at it. And actually, we don't know a lot of these other costs, so maybe I'm not as hot on it as it is. And I think others being aware, hey, you want to hire a person, awesome. Here's the break even in sales to do it. You want to hire someone at $150 a year. Okay, well, we're gonna have to find about $700,000 worth of top line to pay for them, or $1 million to pay for them.
Exactly.
So, or we're gonna have to find a hard dollar amount in savings to get that. So
No, that's a great tool for a lot of businesses.
yeah.
Almost all of them could use it.
So is there enough awareness? Oh, go ahead.
The process of having someone like me or someone else doing this who has experience is that you do get a lot of questions about financial aspects of the business and some operating aspects of the business that it makes it a useful process and a learning experience for both sides.
Yeah. Any other questions for Michael?
Excellent, thank you.
Michael, with your I'll share your contact information with them. With your PDF, is that okay to share, or would you rather that I not?
Yeah. No, that's for sharing. That's fine.
Okay, the condensed one that you shared with me. So I'll send it off so people can look through that, because that's something.
That'd be great.
That's a long plane ride kind of document to scan there after a couple glasses of wine. But
Well, I did condense it from 68 pages down to only 40 some pages.
we love it. And you're in New York at the moment.
I am. I'm based here in Brooklyn, New York. Nice 20 degrees here today.
A little snow on the ground.
We had some snow last week, so still a bit left around, but not too bad. No great complaints.
Michael, thank you again for your generosity of your time and the quality work you do. We appreciate it.
Yeah,
thank
thanks,
you.
Michael.
Thank you for putting up with me. I've never done this before, so I needed the training.
All right. Thank you, Michael. Take care.
Thanks.
Bye bye.
Good stuff.
Thanks for indulging.